Namaskar. Administration, Central, Provincial, Local, Central Government. The Act for Better Government of India 1858 transferred the power to govern from the East India Company to the British Crown. The company's limitations in administering the country in complex situations had been exposed by the revolt of 1857. Besides, there was not much accountability. Now the power to govern was to be wielded through a Secretary of State. Earlier, this power was exercised by directors of the company and the Board of Control. The Secretary of State was to be a member of the British Cabinet and was to be assisted by a council of 15. He was answerable to the British Parliament. All initiatives and final decisions rested with the Secretary and Council was only advisory in nature. Thus, the dual system introduced by Pitt's India Act 1784 came to an end. Also, the ultimate power over India remained with Parliament. The government in India was to be carried on as before by the Governor-General, whose prestige, if not authority, increased with the new title of Viceroy given to him. The Viceroy was to be assisted by an executive council, whose members were to act as the heads of various departments as well as Viceroy's official advisors. The concentration of the main authority in the hands of the Secretary of State based in London, on the other hand, gradually reduced the Viceroy to a subordinate status and further alienated the Indian public opinion from the government policy making. On the other hand, it had the effect of increasing the influence of British industrialists, merchants and bankers over government policy in India. This made the Indian administration even more reactionary than it had been before 1858. By the Indian Councils Act 1861, a fifth member, who was to be a jurist, was added to Viceroy's Executive Council for legislative purposes. The Viceroy could add 6 to 12 additional members, of whom at least half had to be non-officials, who could be either Indian or English. The Legislative Council, so constituted, possessed no real powers and were merely advisory in nature. Its weaknesses were as follows: it could not discuss important matters and no financial matters at all without previous approval of the government. It had no control over the budget. It could not discuss executive action. Final passing of the bill needed the Viceroy's approval. Even if approved by the Viceroy, the Secretary of State could disallow a legislation. Indians associated as non-officials were members of elite sections only. Princes, landlords, divans, cities, and were not representative of the Indian opinion. The Viceroy could issue ordinances of 6 months validity in case of emergency. The only important function of the Legislative Council was to endorse official measures and give them the appearance of having been passed by a legislative body. The British government in India remained as before an alien despotism. Provincial Government. The Indian Councils Act 1861 returned the legislative powers to the provinces of Madras and Bombay, which had been taken away in 1833. Later legislative councils were established in other provinces. The three presidencies of Bombay, Madras and Calcutta enjoyed more rights and powers compared to other provinces. The presidencies were administered by a governor and his executive council of three, who were appointed by the crown, while other provinces were administered by lieutenant governor and chief service commissioners appointed by the governor general. In the following decades, some steps towards financial decentralization were taken, but these were more in the nature of administrative reorganization aimed at increasing revenues and reducing expenditure, and these did not in any way indicate progress towards provincial autonomy. The guarantee of fixed sums out of central revenues for administration of certain services like police, jails, education, medical services and roads to the granting of fixed sums out of central revenues for administration of certain services like police, jails, education, medical services and roads to provincial governments signified the step the first step in the direction towards bifurcating central and provincial finances in 1870 by Lord Mayo. Now the provincial governments were asked to administer these services as they liked. Certain other heads of expenditure like land revenue, admin- excise general administration, and law and justice were transferred to provinces in 1877 by Lord Lytton. Besides that, this provincial government was to receive a fixed share of the income realized within that province from sources like stamps, excise, and income tax. In 1882, all sources of revenue were divided into three groups: general going entirely to center, provincial going entirely to the provinces, and those to be divided between the center and the provinces. Nevertheless, the central government remained supreme and retained detailed control over provinces. This was inevitable since both the central and provincial governments were completely subordinated to the Secretary of State and the British government local bodies. It was decided to decentralized decentralized administration by promoting local government through municipalities and district boards which would administer local services like education, health, sanitation, water supply, roads, and other basic amenities financed through local taxes. There were many factors which made it necessary for the British government in India to work towards establishing local bodies. One financial difficulty faced by the government due to over centralization made decentralization imperative. It became necessary that modern advances in civic amenities in Europe be transplanted in India over considering India's increasing economic contacts with Europe. 3. The rising tide of nationalism had improvement in basic facilities as a point on its agenda. For a section of British policymakers saw association of Indians with the administration in some form or the other without undermining the British supremacy in India as an instrument to check the increasing politicization of Indians. 5. The utilization of local taxes for local welfare could be used to counter any public criticism of British reluctance to draw upon an already overburdened treasury or to tax the rich upper classes. The important stages in the evolution of local government can be identified as follows. Between 1864 and 1868, Local bodies were first formed in this local bodies Local bodies were first formed in this period, but in most cases consisted of nominated members and were headed by district magistrates. Thus, these were seen not more than as instruments of additional tax collection. Mayo's resolution of 1870 financial decentralization was a legislative revolution inaugurated by the Indian Councils Act of 1861. Apart from the annual grant from imperial government, the provincial governments were authorized to resort to local taxation to balance their budgets. This was done in context of transfer of certain departments of administration such as medical services, education, and roads to the control of provincial governments. This was the beginning of local finance. Mayo's resolution emphasized local interest, supervision, and care are necessary for success in the management of the funds devoted to education, sanitation, medical relief, and local public works. The various provincial governments, such as in Bengal, Madras, North West Province, Punjab, passed municipal acts to implement the policy outlined. Ripon's resolution of 1882, the government of Ripon desired the provincial governments to apply in case of local body the same principle of financial decentralization with Lord Mayo's government had begun towards them. For this contribution, Lord Ripon is called the father of local self-government in India. The main points of the resolution were as follows. The government of local bodies advocate to improve the administration and as an instrument of political and popular education policy of administering local affairs through urban and rural local bodies charged with definite duties and entrusted with suitable sources of revenues. Non-officials to be in majority in these bodies who could be elected if the officials thought that it was possible to introduce elections. Non-officials to act as chairpersons to these bodies. Official interference to be reduced to the minimum and to be exercised to revise and check the acts of local bodies, but not to dictate policies. but not to dictate policies. Official executive sanction required in certain cases, such as raising of loans, alienation of municipal property, imposition of new taxes, undertaking works costing more than a prescribed sum, framing rules and bylaws, etc. In pursuance of this resolution, many acts were passed between 1883 and 1885 which greatly altered the constitution, powers and functions of municipal bodies in India, but an era of effective local self-governing bodies was still a dream unfulfilled. The existing local bodies had various drawbacks. The elected members were in a minority in all district boards and in many of the municipalities. The franchise was very limited. District boards may continue to be headed by district officials, though non-officials gradually came to head the municipality. Mus- the district boards continued to be headed by district officials, though non-officials gradually came to head the municipalities. The government retained strict control and it could suspend or supersede these bodies at will. The bureaucracy, in fact, did not share the liberal views of the viceroy and thought that the Indians were unfit for self-government. The closing decades of the 19th century was a period of imperialism, and the highest priest of that creed, Lord Curzon, actually took steps to increase official control over local bodies. Royal Commission on Decentralization, 1908, pointing out the pointing out pointing out pointing out pointing out the lack of financial resources as a great stumbling block in the effective functioning of local bodies. The Commission made the following recommendations. What 1. It emphasized that village panchayats should be entrusted with more powers like judicial jurisdiction in petty cases, incurring expenditure on minor village works, village schools, small fuel and fodder reserves, etc. The panchayats should be given adequate sources of income. Second, it emphasized the importance of sub-district boards to be established in every taluka or tehsil with separate spheres of duties and separate sources of revenue for sub-district boards and the district boards. 3. It urged the withdrawal of existing restrictions on their power of taxation and also the stoppage of regular grants in aid from provincial governments except for undertaking large projects. 4. The municipalities might undertake the responsibility for primary education and, if willing, for middle vernacular schools. Otherwise, the government should relieve them if any changes in regard to secondary education, hospitals, relief, police, veterinary works. It is the Government of India Resolution of 1915. Then this resolution contained the official views on the recommendations of the Decentralization Commission, but the most of the recommendations remained on paper and the condition of local bodies continued to be as it was left by Lord Ripon. The resolution of May 1918. The resolution of May 1918, 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 the resolution of May 1918. This resolution reviewed the entire question of local self-government in the light of the announcement of August 20, 1917, which had declared that the future direction of constitutional advance was towards grant of responsible government to the people of India, and the first step towards the progressive realization of that idea was to be in the sphere of local self-government. The resolution suggested that the local bodies be made as representative as possible of the people, with real and not nominal authority vested in them. Under hierarchy, local self-government was made a transferred subject under popular ministerial control by Government of India Act 1919, and each province was allowed to develop local self-constitutions according to provincial needs and requirements. But since finance was a reserved subject under the charge of an executive councillor, the Indian ministers could not do much work in the sphere of local self-government for lack of funds. The Simon Commission, May 1913, pointed out the lack of progress of village panchayats except in UP, Bengal, and Madras. The Commission suggested the retrograde step of increasing provincial control over local bodies for the sake of efficiency. The Commission also adversely commented on reluctance of elected members to impose local taxes and observed that generally speaking the management of finances of local bodies had deteriorated since the introduction of the reforms of 1919, the Government of India Act 1935, and after. The provincial autonomy ushered in by the Government of India Act 1935 gave further impetus to the development of local self-governing institutions in India. Portfolio finance began under the control of popular ministry. Now the funds could be made available for development of local bodies. Further, the demarcation of taxation between provincial and local finance, which prevailed since the reforms of 1919, was scrapped. New acts were passed in the provinces, giving more authority to the local bodies. However, financial resources and power of taxation of local institutions remained more or less at the same level as in the days of Ripon. Rather, after 1935, certain new restrictions were placed on powers of local bodies to levy or enhance terminal taxes on trades, callings and professions, and municipal property. The provincial governments seemed to have ignored the liberal policy of granting wide powers of taxation to local institutions as recommended by the Decentralization Committee in 1908. The Constitution of Free India directs the state governments to organize village panchayats as effective. The Constitution of Free India, the Constitution of Free India, the Constitution of Free India, the Constitution of Free India. The Constitution of Free India directs the state governments to organize village panchayats as effective organs of local self-government. Article 40. The 73rd and 74th Amendments are aimed at plugging the loopholes in the structure of local self-governing institutions in rural and urban areas. Dhanyawad. Thank you so much.